My dick is drained.
Marge, I'm confused. Is this a happy ending or a sad ending?
It's an ending, that's enough.
So, with my recent review of Fixed out of the way, I was thinking about what I could talk about next. But as it turns out, the whole situation surrounding Fixed actually helped me figure out what I can talk about. So, does anyone remember Sausage Party?
Oh shit, here we go again.
Back in 2016, Sausage Party was released to generally favorable reviews. Created by animation companies named Columbia, Annapurna, and Point Grey, while also being directed by Seth Rogen, it follows the story of food products in a world where food is actually sentient in their own isolated dimension. At a local grocery store, they await their chance to be chosen by the gods and brought into paradise. But things go awry when a hysterical honey mustard is returned to the store. Before he can reveal the dark truth, he throws himself into oblivion, prompting a group of friends to seek the truth for themselves. It's up to a hot dog named Frank to discover what really happens when they're chosen by the gods, and how to put a stop to their dark ways. When it first came out, people were talking about its uniqueness as an animated film, tackling its themes about religion and homogeneity in a way that could only be done with the premise they went with. But over time, that view of the movie started to change. It's something of an inverse of those movies that gain a cult following over the years, where it originally gained praise for its thematic writing but is now criticized for its over-reliance on profanity and sex jokes. It's one of those rare instances where the cult following ends up happening in reverse, where you expect the movie to be more appreciated with time. But nowadays, it's viewed as a mess of story and characters that doesn't properly execute its intended message. So how exactly did this happen? I decided to give the movie a rewatch to determine if its muddied reputation is completely deserved. And while it does still have some quality elements, I totally get where they're coming from. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that a movie written and directed by Seth Rogen would end up being crass and vulgar. But this stuff gets really oversaturated in this movie. Not 1 minute goes by without someone saying a curse word or making a sexual innuendo, regardless if it does anything to further the story and characters. In fact, one of the movie's running jokes is how sex is pretty much the only defining motivation for any of these characters. They're always talking about getting laid or physical pleasure or whatever other private activities they fantasize about in the great beyond. It really feels like just one joke being played on repeat for most of the movie's runtime, and it wears out its appeal very fast. And it's not even that the adult language is that perverse or shocking. They just don't do anything with it. It's just there for no reason. Swearing can work if it's being used to emphasize the emotion a character is feeling, or if it's used scarcely to catch you off guard. But when you're dropping an F-bomb or a C-bomb or an S-bomb every 20 seconds, it becomes empty, hollow dialogue that says nothing and does nothing. Even when they do try to use explicit language in a fitting way, like to express the horrors the food products experience, it's done so many times in the span of a few seconds that it just doesn't register.
Everything we've ever known is a dirt-covered pile of shit, jacking off in our fucking faces, covering our eyes with their cum, so cum-covered we can't fucking see! We don't know! We don't know they're jerking off into our eyes! Our faces!
The profanity in this movie is just a cheap gimmick, an attempt to sound edgy and shocking when it doesn't even have an effect by the time you get to the 10-minute mark.
You know, that word's getting kind of old. It's not really funny anymore.
There's also the over-reliance on sexual innuendos, which also gets really repetitive and cringy. It's so uncreative and fruitless that it becomes white noise. None of it is used to explore the characters and their chemistry with each other. It's just there for the sake of being there, like a kid who thinks it's cool. It's incredibly immature and boring because there's hardly any utility to it. They just want to be perverted for the sake of being dirty. It doesn't even make sense in universe for the characters to act so raunchy. Because of their deep-seated religious beliefs and wanting to be pure, it makes no sense for them to do all this swearing and sex talk. It completely breaks the immersion we're supposed to be feeling. And you might be thinking, oh well, obviously that stuff isn't important. If you ignore the crass adult humor and focus on the actual writing, it gets better. But that's a problem when more than half the movie's content is just that. And even if you ignore these things, there isn't that much story or character to be found. Because of the exploitive approach to the humor, the pacing is really slow and boring. A lot of major plot points end up being rushed or happening off screen. It also has a problem with how it jumps between different plot points and how it breaks the movie's tone, like how it goes from barbaric and scary to mundane and calm. And the characters are extremely stereotypical and one-dimensional. On a surface level, it does seem like a good idea for the message they're sending. The inhabitants of the store represent a society where all the groups are cut off from each other and homogenized. Everyone believes their group is better than all the others, which results in everyone acting pompous towards each other and intolerant to those they view as inferior. The problem is that the movie focuses on this too much. Most of the characters only talk about their supremacy, so too much of their identity is strapped to it. There's only like 3 characters with a more fleshed out identity: Frank, Brenda, and Barry. Honestly, even if you cut out all the crude sexual humor and language, there's barely a story to speak of. Just the food products traveling across the store while testing their faith. There isn't enough sincerity to it because of how one-note the relationships are. Frank and Brenda are boyfriend and girlfriend with conflicting opinions. That's it. Barry is timid and has to learn to be more courageous. That's it. Kareem and Sammy are stand-ins for the Israel-Palestine conflict. That's it. Teresa is a Mexican stereotype with a crush on Brenda. That's it. And honestly, this movie could have really done without Douche since he adds practically nothing to the story. The gods are already designated villains, so why do we need another one? Their story arcs are really underdeveloped, not taken seriously and played off as a joke. The majority of the movie is unfortunately a novelty because of these things. And there's also a lot of world-breaking things because there's no consistency to its rules. A lot of things that are sentient when they shouldn't be or things that should be sentient but they aren't. And even beyond that, it never really delves into what the characters learn. Any clever moments of dialogue are extremely few and very far between. And ultimately it's not even an original idea. Crass and raunchy R-rated animated films go back decades, so Sausage Party doesn't even have that going for it. It's a really repetitive movie that just tries too hard. But if that's the case, why did anyone ever like it? If it's really just a bunch of crass sex jokes and swearing, where did the initial positive reception come from? Well, I think it all comes down to a certain scene that happens later in the movie. It may not seem like a lot at first, but once you start putting the pieces together, it starts to make more sense. We already established the idea that the food products represent different ethnicities and groups, and how they're all bigoted and homogenized. It acts as an exploration of things like racism, xenophobia, racial supremacy, things that sound interesting in a vacuum but aren't given enough spotlight. But things start to get interesting when Frank starts challenging his faith. When he finds the non-perishables, they explain the origins of the food market. In the beginning, the food products were aware of their impending doom, always screaming in terror as they were purchased. So the non-perishables invented the narrative of the great beyond. They came to realize there was no escaping their dark fate, so they figured the least they could do was give everyone a sense of comfort to make their last moments meaningful. But as Frank starts asking more questions, Firewater starts going over the song they originally came up with. The intended purpose of the song was to give people a sense of hope so they would be allowed to feel something other than terror and fear. But over time, the food products of the store started acting superior to others, and started making changes to the song to fit their own narrative.
The aisles started changing my verses to support their own views. Fucking with Twink's tight-ass lyrics, remixing my shit without my permission.
If you haven't figured it out yet, Sausage Party isn't simply a commentary on different ethnicities or groups of people. It's also a commentary on religion. It explores the dangers of faith and how it can be twisted and corrupted to suit the views of individual people. And through that corruption, there are people who use religion to hold power over others. And it usually ends up working as a lot of pressure is put on the other individuals. This is further supported by some notable dialogue in the movie. The food products talk about all sorts of things relating to their faith, like purity and sin and how they're being punished for angering the gods. It explores people who hold their beliefs very strongly and how it can result in tension and friction between established groups. It's honestly a pretty accurate portrayal of how religion has affected our history and its influence on people over several millennia. Looking past the crass humor, it's a sound observation of how certain people may challenge their faith in something and some of the existential dread they experience while doing so. And it can be hard trying to reason with people who are so tight in their beliefs unless you come up with a reasonable middle ground. Barry's point isn't that Frank is wrong about the gods. It's that he needs to find a way to properly communicate with the other food products. Look for a way to inspire them and bring them together. It sends a message about how people with different origins and beliefs can be brought together to serve a greater purpose. Just put aside your petty differences and actually be a community. And even though it may not be important to the story, I have to commend the movie for having very effective moments of legitimate horror. There's a lot of surprisingly harsh deaths in this movie that are very gruesome when you really think about what's being done to these characters. The kitchen massacre is a really big example of this, with so much terror and intensity being put on display. Imagine being chopped, skinned, boiled, flayed, sliced, crushed, and baked alive one by one with no chance of escape. And there's no limitations to what they can show because there's no blood and internal organs. It's a very interesting use of the characters being food products. They're capable of showing strong brutal violence without displaying any explicit images of gore. There's also some pretty good ominous build-up to things like Frank's discovery of the cookbook and Honey Mustard's psychological meltdown. You see their faith being completely shattered and they both have different ways of dealing with it. Honey Mustard defies the so-called gods by ending things on his own terms, while Frank tries to save the rest of the market from succumbing to their dark fate. Scenes like this create a notable sense of tension and fear, allowing the characters to feel somewhat fleshed out in spite of the constant sex jokes. Sausage Party's commentary on religion doesn't come from any sort of malice. It feels like a genuine deep dive into how people feel about these things. It explores their devotion to their beliefs while also exploring those who challenge them. And it also shows the danger religion can hold over people, how it can be corrupted and twisted to abuse power over people. It's done in a smart way that I've honestly never seen in any other animated movie, and I kinda respect it for that. There's still a lot of negative reception surrounding this movie and I completely understand why. It still has pretty good commentary on religion and how communities are capable of putting aside their differences and working together. But the more I look at it, the more I realize it's also the movie's biggest hindrance. Sausage Party prioritizes themes over everything else, resulting in a very forgettable cast of characters and a story that's all over the place. So much of its comedy is over-reliant on crude adult humor, and even without that, the characters aren't allowed to feel more fleshed out or developed. While I don't think it's as abrasive as a lot of people make it seem, it's still a rather forgettable movie. Nothing about it warrants more than one viewing because there really isn't that much to come back to. It honestly had a lot of potential to be good, but it was sadly wasted. Maybe there's an example I can go over to demonstrate a more hands-on approach to making an engaging adult animated comedy. Oh, I know. Let's talk about Fixed again.
We're gonna go out there and chuck every bit of fun out of those balls before you lose them.
Together, we're all gonna suck your...
Don't let your kids watch it!
Not too long ago, I did a review of Genndy Tarakovsky's Fixed, covering some of the drama surrounding it as well as the story and characters past the crass adult humor. This was a passion project that Genndy wanted to make as far back as 2008, and on August 2025, his dream finally became a reality, much to the grief of the many unfortunate souls who saw the trailer. And I'll admit I was one of those unfortunate souls. It did not do anything to put people's faith in this movie. It was nothing but crass sex jokes, innuendos, focusing on the guys going to a strip club, a literal clip of one of the boys penetrating a girl while his girlfriend skulls him for cheating on her, and because it was a movie focused on dogs, you know there's gonna be piss and shit jokes at some point. And the outrage that followed was all over the place, with reactions ranging from, what a waste of Genndy's talent, to, how fucking dare you sexualize animals, you sick zoophiles? Even though we've already been doing that for the last 90 years, but whatever. As for me, I was sort of just disappointed with it, but in a strange way I was also curious. I mean, this is Genndy Tartakovsky we're talking about, one of the most prolific storytellers in the field of animation. This guy gave us Samurai Jack for crying out loud. And now he's making a raunchy South Park-esque comedy focusing on dogs acting sexually. But at the same time, it's Genndy Tartakovsky. I've known his work almost my whole life, so I know he's a genuine artist. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't put his faith in something unless he truly believed it would work. I took the time to look up some articles going over its history, and some of the interviews went over his intent with the film. He wanted to make a movie based on his experiences from high school, and he seemed very enthusiastic about it given how he would describe it leading up to its release. It seemed like there was going to be more to this movie than just sexual innuendos, and it wouldn't just be Sausage Party with dogs. So as off-putting as the trailers were, I waited for this movie with bated breath. And thanks to the magic of pirating, I was able to watch it without getting a Netflix subscription. So I sat down, watched it from beginning to end, endured all the crass toilet humor and on-screen balls, and... wow, this movie has no business being as good as it is. It's not one of Genndy's best works, but the amount of sincerity and genuine passion that went into it is really easy to see. This movie was absolutely nothing like how Netflix made it out to be with the trailers. Yeah, Netflix is horrible at marketing their shit, what a fucking shocker. It was actually a well-written film with sincere characters, clever dialogue, interesting subject matter, and solid pacing. Of course, that won't stop people from ripping into it and claiming it's a waste of Genndy's talent, so we should do more to clear this up. With a lot of people comparing this movie to Sausage Party, it only seemed fitting that I try to do the same, and the main differences between them became very apparent very quickly. The first one being the pacing. Sausage Party suffers from slow trudge pacing due to its worn-out approach to comedy. So much of it is spent on listening to the characters talking about sex and swearing, and it gets really old. So much so that some plot points are resolved off-screen. The story is split between different groups of characters, and it's not done in a way that gives each of them the right focus. It's too scattered around, which also results in a problem with the tone, where one scenario can be mundane and then they switch to something crass or scary with no build-up. Fixed has a much better sense of pacing with its story and cast. Most of the movie is centered around Bull, so it keeps a very good focus on his story. With his point of view being the core of the narrative, it never feels like anything happens too abruptly or goes too slow. And it makes sense for it to be focused on him because it's about the dilemma surrounding his impending neutering. And when it does take time to focus on other characters, it's not for long periods of time. They don't detract from the primary source of the plot, which results in better pacing. And the stuff with Bull never goes too fast. They take the time to show how he feels about things, his relationships with the other characters, and his struggle to confess his feelings for Honey while coping with the loss of his nuts. Another good thing Fixed has over Sausage Party is how it handles its themes. Sausage Party does have interesting themes about religion and communities that keep themselves homogenized, but the problem is that these themes are never explored through the characters and their chemistry, at least not as much as it should. There's a scene where Frank and Brenda argue about their conflicting feelings on their faith and how it can come across as him disregarding her feelings. But nothing really comes of it. They just talk about their different points of view and do a third act breakup. And the rest of the movie doesn't do much to resolve the tension between them. They just get together because we have to get to the final battle. I talked before about how the movie explores how religion can be corrupted and used to abuse power over people, but it takes up a very small portion of the movie. The rest of the film isn't really about that. It's just about the food groups discussing the ethics of sexual pleasure and how they have to stop fighting amongst each other. Because of this, the commentary on religion isn't as profound as it otherwise would have been, and it ends up being lost in all the raunchy adult humor. Fixed actually has a few themes going on that you probably wouldn't think about given its immature sex jokes, but they actually tie into the story pretty well. Toxic masculinity, body positivity, social class, having a healthy mindset surrounding sex and relationships, self-acceptance and how the characters learn to love and respect themselves. All of these things are explored in Fixed, and the way it does so is actually really smart. Rather than just have the characters do exposition to explore the themes like Sausage Party, Fixed does so through the actions of the characters and their chemistry with each other. Sterling represents toxic masculinity, thinking a man's worth is entirely based on them having balls. And that's because he was bred to be a perfect show dog with a snooty attitude towards the lower class. This ends up adding to Bull's anxiety when he learns about his neutering, since Sterling is a rival for Honey's affection. Bull places a lot of self-worth in his testicles, so the realization of his impending neutering hits him very hard. And he's also worried about losing Honey to Sterling because he thinks she won't want him after his neutering. It demonstrates the mindset both Bull and Sterling have regarding their manhood, believing that balls are what measure a male dog's worth. And one of the lessons Bull has to learn is that his balls don't make up who he is and how to improve his self-esteem. There's also the topic of the divide in social class among the dogs. A subplot in the movie is Honey getting prepped for a dog show and how the contestants are judged based on how they're represented. It helps explain Sterling's pompous attitude towards those he views as inferior, but there's a more interesting twist to it. The dogs at the dog show are shown to place a lot of pressure on themselves, and if they end up losing, they engage in self-loathing. This could be brought upon by the unrealistic expectations the humans set for them, and it shows the damage it causes to their self-esteem. And when Honey recognizes the stress she accidentally inflicted on her opponent, she realizes how harmful the whole thing actually is. And so Honey decides she doesn't want that life because being different is what makes her happy. We see early on in the movie that she can be as expressive and raunchy as the boys, but she has to keep that part of her bottled up to meet the expectations others have for her as a show dog, which also causes her to have doubts about Bull wanting to be with her. She thinks they're too different for it to work. The class division among the dogs shows how maybe it's not a good idea to spoil your dogs or pamper them so much, because you never know how it'll affect their behavior or view of themselves, which also kinda ties into the body positivity message. Don't let some show dictate how you feel about your image as long as you make an effort to be healthy. There's even the self-acceptance and learning to love yourself thing that's done surprisingly well. It's done with Bull and Honey, who learn from each other to improve their view of themselves. But there's one other instance of this happening with another character. There's a subplot later in the movie where Lucky hits it off with a Doberman named Frankie at the Hump House, and they have a really deep conversation about their self-esteem due to being different from others. With Lucky being the comic relief of the group and Frankie being intersex, this is something that could have easily been played off as a joke. But the writers demonstrated a lot of dignity for them, just having Lucky learn to accept himself better with Frankie as his mentor. It's a surprisingly mature and adult exchange between them with grounded dialogue. All of these themes are executed a lot better in Fixed than in Sausage Party, because its teachings come from how organic the characters are. Sausage Party was lacking that sense of connection due to how lacking the cast is. They didn't do anything with them to explore their individual motivations or interests or really anything outside of sex, and the never-ending swearing just makes it worse, which is actually another thing Fixed does better. Now, with this being an R-rated movie, of course there's gonna be profanity, but believe it or not, it's surprisingly tame. There wasn't nearly as much swearing or over-reliance on profanity as I thought there'd be, and certainly not as much as Sausage Party. Like I said before, profanity should be used to enhance the emotion of a character or used scarcely. Sausage Party does not do that. It treats its adult language as part of the joke and overuses it so much to the point it stops being funny. And because of how overused it becomes, it doesn't enhance the emotion of the characters during stressful situations. They say these things so casually all the time, so they just feel like words instead of something they would use to insinuate what they're feeling. This is something that Fixed actually understands very well. The adult language is more reserved or exclusive to Rocco since he's the hot-headed member of the group. The movie doesn't just go filter off all the time because of its R rating, which creates a lot of opportunity for the writers to come up with more creative jokes. Jokes based on timing, the chemistry between the characters, the movie setting, the point of view of the dogs. There's so much diversity to its comedy than even most Western adult animations currently out. One of my favorite examples of this is the back and forth between Sterling and Bull at the dog park. Sterling remarks that Bull smells terrible, to which Bull responds by proudly listing all the unsanitary things he smells like. Sterling meant what he said as an insult, but Bull takes it as a compliment while knowing the intention behind it. And then he proceeds to roast Sterling real good by bringing up inbreeding and how his existence is a result of pure, unfiltered incest. Not only was this a very clever use of dialogue, dialogue, but it perfectly illustrates the difference between Bull and Sterling and the way they think. Sterling is really orthodox due to his breeding and upper-class mannerisms, while Bull is more casual and embracive of his wild side. Dialogue that delves into their personalities and how they interact. Stuff like this is across the movie, and it's actually fantastic how they managed to have all this variety in spite of the crass adult humor. And it's also a much more lively movie because of how much more variety there is to its setting. Sausage Party mostly takes place in one location, the grocery store. And while it is well animated, there isn't really a lot to look at. It's just aisles of different food products and different rooms in the store. It gets sort of unremarkable being in one place all the time. On the other hand, Fix takes full advantage of its premise focusing on dogs by having so many different settings within its runtime. The dog park, the suburbs, the city streets, the dog show, dark alleyways, the strip club, the pound, Honey's backyard. This movie takes place in pretty much every place you'd imagine the dogs would go. There's a large variety of settings throughout the movie, and the time spent on each location is broken up properly, so the backgrounds never become stale or tiring. And because of this variety of setting and dialogue, the profanity has actual impact. When a character says the F-bomb, it actually means something because there's actual emotion behind the use of it, like when Honey says it inside the hump house. It shows her anger and heartbreak towards Bull, and it registers because she wasn't constantly saying it every single minute she was on screen. The more passive use of profanity makes for a more genuine display of the characters during these scenes, and it also helps showcase how great the voice acting is. It's really immersive work with voices that fit both the design and the personalities of the characters. I was actually surprised by how tame this movie was with its swearing, and it actually applies to the sexual innuendos too. While the crass sex jokes are present, it doesn't take up as much of the runtime as you'd expect. It still uses the characters and chemistry between them for jokes, and it makes the characters more fun to watch in spite of how tropish they seem on a surface level. With Sausage Party, there isn't too much fun to be had because a lot of the character interactions stem from how bigoted they are. There's hardly anything between them beyond "I don't like you because so-and-so" or "you guys suck." The cast in Fixed has a lot more variety to it with both their personalities and their relationships. Bull and his pack are absolute bros, hanging around and genuinely enjoying each other's company. And there's a lot more to their antics than just picking up girls or getting drunk. They engage in a wide variety of activities. A major part of their appeal is that Bull's friends really just want to be there for him, helping him cope with his neutering and helping him see the value in himself without his nuts. Their friendship is never treated as a gimmick or used as a joke. They share a real connection and have a good blend of funny and thoughtful interactions. The relationship between Bull and Honey is also a lot of fun to watch. It's surprisingly wholesome how their friendship develops into something deeper over time, and their raunchy exchanges are really funny and full of expression. The opening bit where they just act like doofuses together is really engaging. It shows them being close friends before establishing any sort of romantic tension between them, which helps to make the romance more earnest. They're mostly confident in themselves, but when it comes to expressing their feelings for each other, they act shy and uncertain. But the movie takes time to make them engage in conversations outside of just being romantic, so there's more to the relationship than two high schoolers having a crush on each other. They actually have a lot in common with how Honey is very expressive and full of personality. You would normally expect her to be proper and professional due to her upbringing as a purebred show dog, but she's actually just as raunchy and mischievous as the boys. I never got anything like this when watching Sausage Party. The character interactions in Fix were just so much more layered and had a lot more put into them. It makes good use of all the characters' different personalities to give us creative and witty dialogue that explores their personalities and their relationships with each other. And as immature as this may sound, the crass humor actually fits a lot better here than in Sausage Party. The movie is centered around dogs, and people tend to forget that dogs can be pretty crass and gross. They don't do anything unnatural or unexpected throughout the movie. We're watching dogs just acting like dogs. Yes, the sex jokes are crass and typical, but the behavior of the dogs is fitting and accurate to how they usually act. People should probably be reminded that animals, and especially dogs, are really horny and sexually active. They have biological feelings different from humans and tend to operate on instinct. Unlike Sausage Party that just acts crass for the sake of acting crass, Fixed uses this stuff in a way that's somewhat intuitive. It's used more as a narrative tool than a cheap character gimmick, since the plot is about Bull confronting his self-worth issues tied to his nuts, as well as his feelings towards Honey. The reason they go to the hump house is to help Bull cope with his heartbreak after seeing Honey with Sterling at the dog show, which leads to Lucky confronting his self-esteem issues and Honey confronting Bull about her feelings. It feels like there's an actual reason for this stuff to be in the movie instead of just doing it for shock value. And yes, even the ending sex scene was done so much better than in Sausage Party. At the end of Sausage Party, they do this crazy orgy for no reason at all. It's just there for the sake of being there, treated as a joke and trying to be shocking and gross. Maybe it was funny at first for how over the top and outrageous it was, but nowadays it's just really boring and tiresome. It's not even shocking, it's just white noise. In comparison, that scene where Bull and Honey share that special night together was so beautiful, and it was actually really meaningful with everything that led up to it. I know this part is gonna make me look like a pervert, but I don't care. Bull and Honey confessing their love for each other and joining together for that litter of puppies was a very satisfying scene because there was actual build-up to it, with the movie taking its time to show a sincere connection between them. Bull cares about Honey very much, and every action he takes throughout the movie reinforces his commitment to her. Even at the dog show, he was willing to give her up because he just wanted her to be happy. You'd think this would lead to him having a moment of weakness at the hump house, but he still thinks about Honey and how much he cares about her. Even before he met Molasses, he didn't feel comfortable with the situation since Honey was still fresh on his mind. Then Honey realizes that being with Bull makes her happy because she's allowed to be herself when she's around him. And even though the misunderstanding can be annoying, it's understandable from both sides. When Bull realizes the situation he placed himself in, he immediately regrets it, even trying to protect Honey from animal control when she was still angry with him. And Honey's anger was also pretty justified. After so many males only wanting her for her body, she thought she finally found someone who loved her for who she was. And that someone turned out to be the one who was always by her side from the beginning since they were kids. Only to be heartbroken at the thought that Bull was just another pervert. But Bull comes to her rescue and apologizes for it, owning up to his mistake and confessing his love for her. Meanwhile, Honey has had more time to think about what happened and subsides her anger from the heat of the moment. Later that night, she thanks him for sparing her the horror of procreating with Sterling. She then tells Bull that he never had to worry about losing his nuts, because his balls never made up who he was. That poem from the start of the film, standing up to Sterling, having fun with his friends, all those characteristics Honey admires about him, these were things Bull always had inside. It comes across as pretty poetic in that she reciprocates the lesson she learned from him. He helped her learn to be herself, so now she helps him learn to be himself, and love himself for who he is and not because he has balls. Honey declares her love for Bull and they finally get together. This scene is so passionate and heartwarming, making for a satisfying payoff for all the crazy stuff laced throughout the movie. There was a genuine build-up to it with how the relationship plays out, and the visual techniques they use further insinuate the passion behind it. The starry night sky, the cool color palette, that beautiful 360 spin as they embrace and mate. I couldn't think of a more romantic way for this to play out. And the best part is, it's not treated as a punchline for a raunchy joke. The movie just lets them have their moment. No over-the-top music, no loud moaning, no intense slapping sounds, just two people expressing their love for each other. Not only was this scene heartwarming, it was also very mature. It simply lets you know that the two lovebirds finally did it and are happy together. It was actually romantic with the ambience and smooth body language and expression Bull and Honey have for each other. Sausage Party just smears a load of sex in your face with no shame, and it's treated as one raunchy joke that goes on for too long. There wasn't even anything tying it with the rest of the plot. It's just there for shock value. But unlike Sausage Party, there's actually a story surrounding the sex in Fixed. It was even handled better than literally the majority of live-action movies with sex in them. And it's also refreshing to have a couple in an adult animated comedy where the two actually love each other, rather than have them in a failed marriage just for the sake of meaningless black comedy. It shows how the writers actually wanted to tell a story with this couple. They're not just using them as a tool for cheap jokes or edgy scenes that leave the audience going, "Oh my god, if you two hate each other that much, why don't you just get a fucking divorce?" And ultimately, that's what separates these two movies from each other. If you remove all the sex jokes and swearing from Sausage Party, you're pretty much left with a mediocre movie with by-the-numbers social commentary. It does have some good commentary on religion, but it's not in the movie long enough to really stand out. However, if you remove the sex jokes and swearing from Fixed, it still has plenty of rewatch value. You still have a well-written and well-paced story with fun characters, comfy atmosphere with its variety of hand-drawn artwork, a wide variety of creative jokes, interesting themes about self-esteem and toxic masculinity, and honestly, one of the best romantic couples I've ever seen in a cartoon. And I think what truly makes this movie work so well stems from Genndy himself. He's a genuine artist who deeply values animation as a tool for telling stories, and you can tell that he truly wanted to use this movie as a means to push the boundaries of adult animation. Fixed is so much more than a raunchy South Park or Family Guy clone. It has an actual story to tell with its characters with an actual message to send to its audience. It's definitely a movie with a weird concept, but it becomes something more through genuine storytelling and successful execution. It's a story about all the little things in life and how to appreciate the stuff that makes life worth living. And it also teaches people it's okay to let certain things go. Things in life will come and go. In Bull's case, quite literally. But it doesn't stop you from being who you are. You'll still experience new things in life and live every second of it. Seriously, this movie is not as harmful as a lot of YouTubers are claiming it is. I understand being turned off by the toilet humor and sex jokes, but the people screaming zoophilia at it clearly have no idea what zoophilia actually is. This is a movie that honestly deserves more attention and recognition, because the actual love and effort that Genndy and his crew put in it is so evident and genuine. It's a piece of media that comes from a place of genuine passion, rather than just trying to exploit audiences for money or push some stupid misguided message. If you're watching this video, do what you can to promote Fixed. It's definitely not for everyone due to its toilet humor and notable raunchiness, but it's worth showing people there was more genuine thought put into it than a lot of people on the internet have made it out to be. It has a good blend of character interactions with effective growth for multiple characters, it has a passionate love story, it has a sincere vision behind it, it has a sense of dignity that isn't present in most adult comedies, it's simply a genuinely good movie, one that deserves more notoriety for its contribution to animation. Just remember to have that fast forward button on standby.